Welcome to The Middle. This is episode number 4, and we're going to be talking about masculinity. Masculinity, the title of it, actually, John came up with.
Navigating Manhood.
Navigating
Manhood. It is a rough and rocky road.
Man, oh man. Mm-hmm. So I'm Gary Eelman.
And I'm John Berardino.
And we thank you for joining in. If you like our channel, we would very much appreciate subscribing. You say subscribing. Subscribe. Yeah, we would push that button and that says subscribe and give us a thumbs up, and that'll help us stay interested and engaged with this. We're having a lot of fun with it. We think we're covering a lot of important subjects that other people may enjoy. Other people might write nasty comments, and that's okay too. We'll take them all and we'll read them all and get back to you when you can. So, John, I'm going to let you. This is one of your big subjects, and I'd love to hear something about it.
It's a big subject because working with veterans for a majority of my career, and working in the male population mostly, obviously, when I encountered these types of experiences with individuals who were coming out of the military and referencing what their identity was, of course, you go in, like I'd say, at an early age, 17, 18, 19, and that's when you kind of uncover and start to discover, okay, who am I? What am I? Some of that was organized for them through the structure of the military. You got a rank, you got a certain company or unit that you're with. But a lot of us, when we're coming out of our adolescent experiences, don't necessarily have a structure or community or accessible ways to label and identify ourselves. So when it comes to manhood, we don't really explicitly communicate with each other about what that is. You know, and as you and I were talking, we were saying, okay, well, Gary, how did you learn how to become a man? How did you learn about what masculinity was or what that means to you? So I wanted to ask you, I said, well, where did you learn how to be a man? And what did you learn, or where did you learn what that meant to you to be a man?
Yeah. And I don't have a clue. I think it was a whole lot of things, so many inputs that you can process and that makes you feel different, I'll say, than at the time than a girl, right? So you're a boy. Yeah. You get beat up. Yeah. You get in fights. Yeah. If you're in catechism, you get smacked on the knuckles. Yeah. By the nuns. They didn't do that to the girls so much. I think I've mentioned in a podcast before, I'm not sure, but when I was in junior high, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, the teachers were able to paddle you, and each designed their own to be efficient. And that separated you from the girls because they didn't have to do that.
They didn't get that.
So this all became part of being a boy and eventually a man. I used to watch a lot of Westerns. I still watch a lot of Westerns. It's my favorite genre. Yeah. So if I were homesick from school or whatever, I would watch John Wayne and Dean Martin and all the Westerns. Actually, Dean Martin wasn't such a big Western star, but he was in a couple. And I can't even think
Sons of Katie Elder.
There you go.
My dad watched Westerns, that's mine.
Okay, so
I think that was the one.
So, I think a lot of the role models that I lacked from my idiots parents that I lived with, my stepfather and my mother, they didn't impart to me anything that was of value at all. So I would say I learned a lot from Western movies.
I think movies, I Marvel superheroes these days, Avengers and all these other things. These are real pivotal figures for children and adolescents and young adults to learn even maybe their worldview through. Yeah. But it's interesting primarily because the frontiers of masculinity and ways in which we learn, like, well, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to demonstrate masculinity? A lot of it comes through our value systems. Sure. So I was raised in a household and really a family where everyone was an athlete. So I learned my values through sports. Mm-hmm. And a lot of kids do, of course, and they learn certain morals or ethics or how to get along and how to make sacrifice and how to dedicate and discipline themselves. But what happens, though, is that as maybe you phase out of that community,
Sure.
you have to learn, okay, well, now where am I going to develop an identity? And how are the values from my experience in sports, let's say, how is that going to carry over into the workplace? Is it going to be competitive? Is it going to be zero-sum game? Is it going to be winners and losers? How am I going to see myself? What does that mean to me in regards to achievement or even approval and acceptance? So we will look to the people around us to kind of absorb some of those messages and labels and maybe ideals. But I think what I wanted to talk about today is where do we go from there? You know, we graduate into the workplace, and let's say we're in a career for 20 years, and then we reach maybe 40 or 50, and we say, okay, do I feel like I'm the same man, the same human being that I was when I started this career? Let's say at 21 or 22. Did you notice anything did you notice a pivoting of any kind for yourself, moving from how you identified your manhood at 21 to how you then identified it at 51?
Well, I don't know. I mean, to be perfectly honest, from 21 to 51 is kind of a blur for me.
Right.
I was busy, I was busy with my career.
Right.
I made a lot of moves. I was very, very fortunate in that I was in a heavy industry where my particular talents, which were mostly related to people and leadership and getting things done. I mean, I like to say, I think you and I have said before, we're people who get shit done, and that's the way I was looked at. And so I was very busy with that. I had a family. I've had 4 children. And, I always felt the very, very traditional role of I'm the supporter. I'm on the treadmill. I'm okay, but I'm going to run faster than anybody else.
Right.
Did I feel a change from, now I'll just address this for a moment. Maybe this isn't something you want to talk about so much, but from the age of 60 to 70, yeah, I mean, there's been a tremendous change, and I'll admit it. I had always said when I was younger that I would never retire because I'd go out of my mind.
Yeah,
I'm going out of my fucking mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like this at all. I would give anything to turn back the pages of time and be, be succeeding in my career and busy and interacting with many, many people, which I did. I'm an extrovert. That's how I get my energy. That's how I get my jollies. So, I've taught at BSU, and that was enjoyable. But things wind down, and you don't. I think for most men who have lived what I'll call, in very broad terms, typical manhood, career, family, you get to the end of it, and then what we don't think about at 50 or 55 is what's going to happen soon. And even though I thought about that, and this is the part that shocks me, even though I thought about that, and I could admit to people at 55, I don't ever want to retire. I don't want to be bored. I'm not going to sit around and wait. Yet, anyway, here I am at 70. And I'm in that position, so
and that's why I titled this "Navigating Manhood" because
it is a navigation.
We have to navigate, and we're saying, am I consciously navigating this? Am I just kind of letting the current take me into these various phases of my life? One of the pivotal moments for me was I had a path that was kind of ordained for me to become a baseball player like my father. And I went through the progressions in Little League and high school, and then I had a scholarship to play college baseball. And I remember turning my dad one night. I was just racked with this intense emotion, and I said, "Dad, I don't want to play college ball." And he was confused. He's like, "You have this incredible opportunity. You're blessed with this ability. You should do it. I don't understand why." And I remember just out of nowhere, I said, "I don't want to be you." I know it's funny because up until that time,
that's something for him to hear.
It was because I had just assumed up until that time that's what I was supposed to be. Yeah. That's what a boy is. That's what a young man is. That's what he's going to do. Yeah. And you follow, as opposed to injecting something. Obviously, as I think for me, it was a moment of vulnerability, because I thought I was going to lose the love of my father by making that statement.
Wow.
But my relationship with him, I think, actually got better. Because the next question is, well, what are you going to do? and that's the question you hear in America. It's what do you do?
Well,
it's like, who are you? What do you do?
Just to opine for a moment on that. I mean, just to pause on that. When he said to you, "What are you going to do?" That had to be a giant relief from you, like just something coming off of your back. Like you were so concerned about, I mean, obviously you blurted it out, I don't want to be you.
Yeah.
And then instead of him getting angry and, you should be me because I did this and I did that. Yeah. It didn't go that way for you.
No.
It went to, well, okay, what are you going to do?
Right.
That's a fantastic response.
It is a fantastic response. And I appreciated everything that occurred afterwards because I was dealing with these assumptions, these fears.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, these were legitimate, real fears. Yeah. And even into the day he died, I carried this weight of guilt because in fact, I apologized to him on his deathbed. That's how serious it was. Even though I made the remark and I said, I don't want to be you, and I'm willing to kind of open up to this kind of new landscape of uncertainty that says, I don't know what
did you apologize for?
Well, and that's the thing. I can look back and I can say, I didn't need to apologize. And I don't think he needed me to apologize. But I think what it was in my mind, I felt I had to embrace and embody what he had assumed I should be. And because I didn't do that, and I felt indebted to the lifestyle that he gave me, which was, I felt privileged by, I did still feel some semblance of indebtedness to him.
Wow.
So it was a remarkable moment for me because I've looked back on that so many times throughout my life and said, I did the right thing by doing that. But it took me a while to get to that point where I could say, I want to be a psychologist. I want to dedicate my life to caring for and helping others with their mental health problems. So, but it came back to it through that time period where I didn't know what I wanted to do to where I figured that out. I realized I had said, well, what are my values? And I know you and I talked about this before, intrinsic values versus extrinsic values. Yeah. And I didn't have extrinsic values that were dedicated towards wealth and fame and maybe external success and power. It was something deeper. There was intimacy was important to me. Connection was important. Community was important. Empathy was important. Those are my values. And that's where I could sense and see that's unique to me.
It's not, it's unique to you in your own life.
Yeah.
I think it's unique. Like that's a unique experience among men.
Yes.
If I don't have any data to back this up, so this is sort of faith-based, which I preach against, but just my own sense, my own intuition about this is if I took 10 men, lined them up, and we went through those same steps that you took, right?
Yeah.
So your father does this, and I would think that 80-90% of them are following the footsteps, the ordained path that has been set forth for them. So for you not to reach for the golden rings and all the material things and all that, and to instead have this desire to want to help other people, be engaged in your community, help your fellow man, and heal when you can. I mean, all of those kind of things. Very different, I think. I think that's unique.
It was unique for me, and I would say maybe I'm hoping there's other men out there perhaps who've had moments where they've looked inside themselves and say, I want to do something different.
Yeah.
I don't want to continue down the path that I'm on because it was either prescribed or I just fell into it, or perhaps I assumed that's what everyone expects me to do, or that's the way in which I can develop this lifestyle that might suit my aspirations and dreams.
Sure.
But for me, I recognized that there was something deeper, and I needed to listen to it in a way where I could finally start to accommodate it. I will say it did begin with kind of more of a who are you as opposed to what do you do? And then the second step is, well, how are you going to get there?
Yeah.
And what's that going to look like? Now that can happen at 21.
Oh, sure.
Or that can happen at 51.
Yeah.
And I think, we're talking about the middle here because I've had people that I've worked with where it's happened at retirement.
Yeah.
Now I get to do what I want to do.
Yeah. So short anecdote about that exact thing. Just before I completely retired, it was so hard for me to retire that I retired and stayed on as a consultant for probably 7-8 months, and went from there to another consultant job in the same industry, stayed there and went back to the other company. I just couldn't get out of the circle. I just needed to be in that circle where I felt comfortable and engaged. Ultimately, though, it's come to a point where I'm actually still a consultant, but somewhere around 65 or so, we were camping out, maybe 64, and there was a group of us that were close, in not in age, but in just in friendship. And we went around we had a fire going, and it was like, it sounds kind of Boy Scoutish, but it really wasn't. I mean, I won't deny we were imbibing in some alcoholic beverages, but we were just having a great discussion. Right. And none of us were drunk, and we began talking about what each one of us want to do with the remainder of their lives. Yeah. And everybody had a goal, and every one of those goals were centered around their life and what they wanted to achieve and what they wanted. And when it got to me, and this came straight, I didn't even know this was coming. Like I wasn't thinking about it, and I was last. And they said, if you could do anything you want, what would you do with the rest of your life? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, I would like to help every one of you achieve the goals that you want to achieve. That would bring me the most joy. Right. And it always has brought me a tremendous amount of joy in leadership positions and helping men and women. And I was one of the first in my industry to begin hiring women and minorities, and I almost liked the shock of it to everybody else. Like, the world is changing, dude. Yeah. You're going to have to start to keep up with it. In fact, I'm going to set the trend. Yeah. And I think that was the best part of my entire career. I was involved with heavy machinery that I don't want to talk about because, I got my reasons. But I was involved with heavy machinery in a heavy industry, and yet the things that I got the most joy out of I was in sales most of the time. I did huge deals, but the thing that really tripped my trigger, the thing that really made me feel self-gratification out of what I did was motivating and helping and leading my staff. Yeah, that was the best. Yeah, that was just the best.
Yeah, and I that's interesting, Gary, because I wonder how many other peoples who've reached the executive levels that you have, the heights that you have, and these corporations. I wonder how many of them might feel the way that you do, but don't have an opportunity to convey it, or perhaps don't really feel any traction in being able to organize their perspective around it in a meaningful way.
It may sound jaded, and I don't mean to sound like that. And certainly we had some good leaders. I worked for some very good leaders who imparted those kind of values to me. But I would say most people were just out to get what they could
so
get.
They have the extrinsic value.
Exactly.
So there might not be too many people at the corporate level who have intrinsic values like you did.
Exactly.
So you were different. Did you notice that you were different in that way?
Oh, I knew that I was different.
You knew you were different.
Because I knew that the leaders that I aspired to be like were different. Right. And so you could line up 10 leaders, and if I found one out of them that I was particularly attracted to in terms of the leadership style and the way they communicated to people, I knew that's the person I wanted to be like, and I knew I would be in a minority.
Yeah. It's interesting because, going back to this notion of role models, movies, figures that we look up to, and in your case, it might have been Westerns. In my case, it might have been athletes, the posters on the wall and everything. I mimicked and mirrored every little thing that they did. And there's rarely an occasion where I started to identify for myself, early on at least, where I'm like, well, what do I want to demonstrate? And do I have the courage to communicate that? Now, I did in that spontaneous moment with my dad, but I'm just saying, just overall, it takes a lot of vulnerability to say, you know what, I want to find what's unique to me, what's central to me, and I want to communicate that to the world. Yeah. And it really takes, there's ambiguity there, there's uncertainty, there's fear, there's critical thinking that we talked about before, and being able to analyze this and take in new information. But I think one of the things that, kind of inspired us to talk about this topic was this kind of alpha male ideology, the toxic emblems and images of masculinity that we have in our society today. And a lot of that's driven by extrinsic values. So I was wondering for you, Gary, how did you manage to get to the points of success in your life while navigating through the minefields of other people who didn't have those values?
It's interesting. I'm going to say my values changed through life. I think most people do.
Okay.
And so when I started to become successful, I started at the very, very lowest point that you can start in a career. I was literally, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, I started in the company I was in, scrubbing toilets and scraping bubble gum off the floor. Okay, that was my position.
Yeah.
I rose in that company and learned leadership as I went up. The first time that I had gone from the company I was in, which was more of an operating company, to more of a financial company, was the first time I hit any home runs financially. But I had a ridiculous thirst for knowledge, so I would take financial books home the same as I would take technical books home when I was with the early company. And what I noticed about myself, and I don't like this, I'm embarrassed by it now, is I did a deal in Mexico for a large amount of money on which I was going to make a huge paycheck as well, and I was excited. I mean, I was really excited.
Yeah.
And that was an extrinsic sort of.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And then I started to go after the money a little too much. I mean, I started to become, financially successful. I never lost sight of my employees, and I wanted them to be as financially as successful as I was and reach their goals. And then, you get to a point, I think I did anyway, where the money dried up, and I took a look back. In fact, I'll just say this. So I had gotten to a point where I was comfortable. Okay, I had lots of fun things and toys and houses in the mountains and boats, and I owned beautiful airplanes and stuff like that. But I gotten to a point where all that had to go away. I'll just leave it at that. When it went away, what I found out was I was carrying around all that crap on my back. Yeah. They were just giant freaking burdens.
Yeah.
And I had lost weight. I had become more healthy. I was eating better. And I remember going to my doctor, who previously I had high blood pressure and all kinds of idiosyncrasies going on with my health. And after the examination, he said, "Man," he says, "I can't believe the change in you over the past 6 months to a year. What's going on?"
Yeah.
And I said, and I'll apologize for the but it was, I think it had to be said. And I just looked at him and I said, "I don't give a fuck." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, I'm invincible."
Yeah.
He said, "What do you mean by invincible?" I said, "I have nothing that anybody can take from me."
Yeah.
And I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. It was newfound for me. And so during that time, I began to focus more, and my values started to change a little more back to what they were before. Now I'm somewhere in the middle, but I don't need the money. I'm not working for money. I'm working truly, and this, by the way, is really gratifying to me to the extent that anybody can learn anything from what we do here. Yeah. I think this is really, really, it may be that from 70 on, this is what I love to do.
Well, and I think what's interesting is that the way in which, in maybe from a mental health standpoint or a clinical standpoint, we would look at it as a value is essentially like your DNA for your personality. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now there might be, because of environmental circumstances or life phases, it might change a little, but it's embedded.
It's embedded.
It's embedded.
Yeah.
So you'll come back to it.
Yeah.
It's an essential part of who you are. Now, that's not discussed, though. We don't talk about these things.
Right.
We don't talk about values. We don't talk about deeper life orientations and the ways in which we organize how we see ourselves.
Yeah.
Unless often it's in comparison to others. So our society is driven by these types of comparisons and competitive dynamics to reach, into areas or levels of success that afford us the types of toys that you had and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's appealing and it's understandable as to why we want to promote that kind of American dream and whatnot. But we also want to try to understand that there are deeper life, meaningful parts of you that have probably not been excavated fully. Mm-hmm. And that we want to continue to keep asking questions around what that is. And that might take vulnerability to get, well, it will take vulnerability to get there.
Yeah.
It will take some level of vulnerability to get there. So, but that's important. I think it's important to talk about.
I think it was probably somewhere in my 20s, my goal was at 45 to quit whatever I was doing and join the Peace Corps. Now, little did I know I was going to have a family to support. And, I was going to hit some home runs and there were other responsibilities. So things changed radically.
Yeah.
I never made that goal. This now that I'm slowing down here, there are other things I want to do. I want to work with the homeless people that we have here, the problems that exist, and help wherever I can there in a positive way and give back whatever I can. And again, to some extent, what we're doing is a part of that.
And most importantly here, Gary, is you can see and sense maybe that there's an arc to your narrative, your personal narrative.
Yeah.
And
but isn't that the same? Maybe not the same for everybody. I don't know. You look at some people who make it to a financial or material level, and they just keep going and going and going. There's a book up. I can't remember the author, but there's a book called Die With Zero right now. It's a great book to listen to, and he proffers that our entire lives are nothing in the end but a pile of memories. It's what they are. It's all we have.
Yeah.
We're left. Anything that's of material nature to us, as we get close to death, is worth nothing. But to the extent that you can use those resources to make memories along the way, which is what I'm trying to focus on doing now. People don't need to inherit money at 60 years old when their parents pass. They need help now. So if you're going to help somebody, help now. That's his hypothesis. And like I say, he posits that when you're getting close to death, nothing that you've gathered is worth anything. But if you can make memories out of that, if you've done some good, then that's important. And I know that's getting a little bit off of the subject, but my point is that I think there is an arc, and I think the arc, at least in this author's mind, and I'll put the name of the author underneath the video when I get it, but at least in this author's mind, again, the name of the book is Die With Zero. At least in his mind, that arc can be radically changed, and for the better and for the healthier of all. It
takes a lot of courage. I think I have a lot of individuals who come into my practice who are disenchanted or disillusioned with their life experience. That could be a marriage, that could be a career. It could be a life orientation, ideology, religious experience, something that they've committed to that now is not yielding whatever semblance of value that it might have had before in the past. So when I talk to a lot of my clients, especially at the midpoint of their life, a crisis can occur that forces them into a position where they need to reflect on other parts of themselves that have been neglected. Yeah. And what I've noticed is I've had a considerable amount of people who have went on to become counselors.
Yeah.
That they look back and they said, I've always thought about this. Okay, well, what prevents you from pursuing it? And what's driving you to make the sacrifices to get there? But it's a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's, obviously I'm an advocate for mental health treatment, but not in the sense of it's an illness. We're treating illness and triaging the problems that you came in with, but also looking towards what parts of you have not been excavated.
Right.
And when it comes to manhood and looking at some of the stories that we use to narrate our identity, we have to look back and say, where did I learn this?
Yeah.
How did that influence and shape the way in which I see myself in the world?
Yeah.
And am I willing to let that go in order to pursue something more meaningful? I don't know what that is. I don't know exactly what that is,
Yeah.
but am I willing to talk about that with another person, a friend, a family member, and to be vulnerable in communicating that? It takes a tremendous amount of courage to do, but that's what needs to occur if we're talking about manhood, if we're talking about healthy expressions of masculinity.
Yeah, and I think healthy expressions of masculinity certainly for me meant being close to my children, and showing them love that they deserve, that every child deserves, and expressing it in every way that I could. I think I failed there, and I think probably a lot of people who work as hard as I did and travel a lot, trying to be successful and get stuck on that treadmill, I think end up with the same kind of guilt that I have. Or if they have a divorce, which I had in my family, and children, people lie to themselves, well, children come out of divorce just fine. Well, they don't. The children get slammed, and mine were no exception. And I regret that. There's nothing I can do about it. It's water under the bridge. But the only thing I could do during that entire time was reassure them that I love them. I'm still your dad. I'm still going to be there for you. And
it's huge, and that's huge.
And I think a lot of people don't get that. I mean, I think a lot of people they think they're divorcing their children when they.
It's a huge rupture. To the family unit,
right?
And of course, quite naturally, so a child is going to feel the instability, the uncertainty, the anxiety of what that means. Where am I going to go? What's this going to look like? How is this going to look? And anytime I work with a male in the past, when it's come to a divorce, I've always encouraged them to do their best to provide as much information to the children as possible, to let them know that I am going to do my best to bridge this with you. And I am going to remain a stable and loving and caring, compassionate figure throughout this process. That is really, really an important piece. And it sounds as if you provided that.
Well, I'd like to think I did. I didn't do as well as I should at it. I had a boy who had some serious issues, and he came to live with me, and that really was fundamentally the biggest issue that was behind the divorce. But the problem was that I had two other children living in the same house that were younger, and so there was an attention deficit for them from me, and I'll feel guilty about that till the day I die. I'm sure we're actually incredibly close right now, and have been for a long time, and there's just nothing between us that we haven't talked out. We've talked it all out,
right?
And I think that was really important and cathartic when they got college age, and
absolutely,
and we went through, hey, why did this happen, Dad? I mean, it was amazing. They were 6, and the next thing I know, they're 19, they're in college, and they're wanting to talk about, hey, what happened? And I was completely and utterly honest I could be without trying to throw anybody under the bus.
Well,
and divorces are going to happen.
And the kind of guilt, maybe it's good to discern between the two. There's adaptive guilt, which can lead to greater levels of responsibility, maturity, and adaptation. And then there's maladaptive guilt. And maladaptive guilt can lead you kind of into this feedback loop of negative self-talk and negative assumptions about yourself, and without having kind of an A to B linear way of dealing with it. The guilt that I dealt with my dad was one that prompted me to say, how can I make this better? How can I make myself better? As opposed to just lingering in this abyss of guilt and just feeling bad and feeling the futility of that badness. Sounds like something similar happened to you, where you were able to maneuver into that position where you said, I want to talk about this, I'm going to explore this and experience this. But one of the points I wanted to just kind of address here is, when we meet that midpoint of our lives, there is a law of diminishing returns. The reliance upon outdated strategies cannot only not be beneficial in the way that they once were, and guilt is one of those elements. It doesn't prompt, there could be adaptive guilt in there, but oftentimes it becomes an inflated, bloated type of guilt, and it doesn't prompt the type of change that we really need. So not only is it not effective, but it can be harmful. So what we need to take into consideration is there's outdated conceptions, there's limiting beliefs that I have, and I need to pivot and make a change. And that's where that vulnerability comes into place. So I think it can also have deeper life questions like, who am I? What do I want? What's my legacy? What is it that I want? And obviously your children are a big part of that.
Yeah, and I look at my boys and I think, I am some image of masculinity to them, and how will they navigate masculinity, and what impact, both positive and negative, have I had? And it's I'm lucky to be alive to see them go through that. My oldest son is in his 40s, almost 40, and my youngest son is 32. And again, we're all very close, and we communicate readily. And my twins are the youngest, and they're very loving. And I think, I never raised my voice at my children, much less at them. I never raised a hand, and I never raised my voice. I never yelled. And I think a lot of that was from my father, who was a pacifist, basically. And if I had followed, I think children have a way to follow masculinity. It seems to me, and you can tell me this, it seems to me they either follow the one or they rebel against it and say, I'm not going to be like that. Yeah. And that was me. I rebelled against my stepfather.
I would absolutely agree with that. We can either idolize and mimic and mirror a certain example and carry that. And that's why when you reach the midpoint of your life, it is very important to reflect back on that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, it's the same thing, though. You rebel against it. And you say, I'm never going to be like that. My grandfather was an Italian immigrant. He would, unfortunately, he worked at a meatpacking plant, and he fell in a vat of oil, and it scarred most of his body, so he was unable to work. But he would, every day, he'd wake up in the morning, and he'd go to this park right around the corners, right near Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. He'd go there every day, sit there with his other Italian buddies. They'd sit and talk, and then he'd come back home. Mm-hmm. He did that every day until the day he died. And my dad was the opposite. He said, I got to be active. I got to be striving. I got to be going after, big goals. Yeah. But it's interesting primarily because he didn't want to go that route. He wanted, and he went against it. He also did what his parents wanted him to do. His father wanted him to be a baseball player. His mother wanted him to be an actor. He did exactly what that was. I was always curious and saying, well, what did he really want to do? And maybe to some extent, instinctively, I felt that from him. Mm-hmm. And I needed to know that I could pursue something for myself that was intrinsic to me. Mm-hmm. And that took a little while to explore and to unpack. But I also knew that I couldn't take a shortcut to get there. I had to kind of wade through some of the discomforts that came along with that. And one of those was guilt, as I mentioned earlier on. But yes, I do agree with you. Like, I can go against it or I can go with it. Mm-hmm. But if you're unaware of the fact that you're still influenced by going with or against, then that can create problems as well. So we reach these points in our life. I mentioned in a previous episode talking about Dante and the Divine Comedy. It begins with him saying, "I reached this midpoint of my life, and it's dark, and I don't know what to do." And then Virgil comes along and guides him into the inferno, into hell. We need people in our lives to help guide us through that. Yeah. And I know people have come to you and they've asked you for their guidance. Isn't that right?
Yes, lots.
Yeah. So, and not like Gary with PhD or master's in counseling, but because you're an accessible person with a lot of life experience and wisdom.
I think that's a critical thing for me, is that I was always accessible. My door was always open. Right. And I was always willing to listen and give my best advice. And there were times when I could say, I can't advise you on this. I'm just not qualified to give you an opinion. I can listen to you, and I'm here for you. I frequently say to people who are good friends of mine, when they've got troubles and they want to talk, I say, I'm your huckleberry. Yeah. I'll listen for you.
It's true.
But, I think having the courage as a man to seek therapy when these things are weighing you down, you don't have answers for them. No. You don't have reasons for the feelings that you feel. I think does take courage. And I think it's a true sign, as opposed to people who think you're weak when you seek therapy. I think it's a true sign of bravery and courage to go seek counseling and therapy when when men are in these binds that they get in emotionally.
We get stuck.
Yeah.
Depression is an extremely common experience. It doesn't have to be clinical depression, but just some time in your life, or maybe a period throughout the week where you feel lower, you feel less than. Maybe the ways in which you're talking to yourself is depreciating, and but it's important to note that what's being communicated to me here, and to have maybe a moment where you can kind of assess what those feelings are. What I notice is anger. It's the only emotion where we have anger management. We have to manage that because it's this frightening thing. It is an really, 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 really important emotion that is continued to be diminished. And I think it has created just this terrible web of taboos around it. If you think about anger, it is at the epicenter of every revolution, whether that's an individual or a cultural or historical or national revolution. We would say something needs to motivate that change. Jung said anger is essential to individuation. And kind of as we alluded to before, even in the story of Jesus, you have a figure who's saying, you need to rebel. You need to go against what has been given to you. You need to let go of that, and you need to move forward into a position that allows you to embrace the essential parts of yourself. So, yes, we need to understand how these emotions influence and shape the ways in which we live our lives. Boredom, loneliness, alienation, emasculation. This happens. In men's lives.
Yes.
In men's lives. So we're instead of saying, well, I'm just going to go drink, or I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to go get laid, or I'm going to get a promotion, whatever that might be, where there's
distraction,
some seductive cultural shortcut that we might have, and it's fine. But we also need to take a moment to say, well, what is that inside of me that I need to listen to? Right. And often you'll have a figure, like yourself, whether it's with your kids or colleagues or friends or family members, that reach out to you and say, I don't know what to do, and you're willing to listen. I would say, as a therapist, that is what I've honed, throughout my career. And my wife gave me the best piece of advice once when she had a crisis. And of course, I'm in there saying, well, what do we need to do? How are we going to fix this? How can we change? She said,
just shut up.
I just need you to listen.
I just need you to listen. Yeah.
Just need you to listen. And I said, that was probably one of the seminal features of my career that really influenced and shaped the way in which I relate to people.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with my wife, and it wasn't, it was, I don't know how long ago it was. It wasn't that long ago, so it was late in my life. And I knew to do that with other people is to just shut up and just listen. Yeah. But with my wife, I was in the white knight syndrome. I got to save her. She's my wife.
Absolutely.
Right? It's part of our masculine
yes.
upbringing is we have to
rescue,
save the damsel in distress.
Yes.
Okay, let's take this one by one.
Yeah.
And I started. After a while, she got frustrated with me, and she started to cry. And I'm like. What's going on? What's going on?
Yeah.
And she says, I don't want you to have the resolution for this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want you to hear me. And I'm like, wow, that was powerful.
So you had it, I had it.
Yeah.
And it influenced and shaped how we related to our partners. And
but it's not part of our natural, our masculine, what would you call it?
Characteristics.
As we grow up.
Active.
Yeah.
We want to be involved. We want to be active. We want to manipulate.
We want to fix this.
We're mechanical. We're trying to kind of see the dimensions of this and then reshape it. But it's difficult for us to just receive.
Yeah.
It's not maybe in our nature to be kind of passive in that way, to receive and then to kind of allow, and then perhaps even just be present with.
Just be present.
To be present.
That's really important.
Without doing something.
Yeah.
We want to do something. And it's the same with our lives as well. I think even when we look at ourselves, it's difficult for us to be present with ourselves.
Yeah.
I think it was Pascal who said one of the most difficult things for a man to do is to sit alone in the room by himself and to just be with himself. So there's
a lot to that. I had to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
I do that now. I do it well. I'm okay. I can sit alone in a room by myself, and I mean, I'm not saying I'm not anything special to be able to do that. I think a lot of that is a function of my age, my past, and where I am now, And as I wish I could cite this author's name, but who wrote "Die with Zero," as he said so well at the end, we are a pile of memories, and now I can sit and I have to admit it's fun. I don't do what my father did, which is he repeated all of his memories, and they were the same ones over and over.
Yeah.
And you had to listen to them.
Yeah.
And he didn't care that he knew
that you knew
that I knew that I had heard the story 100 times before.
Yeah.
In fact, a funny story. The night before he died, he was in the pre-op, and he was fine at the time. He was in no pain or anything, and he started to tell the nurse a story. It's a story I've heard 100 times before, and I can't believe he's doing this. Like it's something about a cow on a farm that he grew up in. It's like, oh my God, And he says, he's looking at her and he says, my son doesn't want to hear any of this. And I said, tell her why, Dad. And he just kind of grunts. And I go, tell her why, Dad. Yeah. And he said, well, he's heard it 100 times before. And I said, more like 1,000. But yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay being alone in a room with myself and my thoughts. And sometimes I go into memories and images of my past, but sometimes I go into not memories, but thoughts of my future, which includes what we're doing here, which includes things that I still want to do. I still have a bucket list of sorts.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of a man's, part of the arc of a man's life. There are some men I see, and you must see it a lot, where, and people have told me this when I tell them my age. They go, "You're not that," because I don't seem that. I don't act that way. I'm not ready to crawl up in a ball and die.
Yeah.
I still want to get out and do things. I ride my snowmobile even though I shouldn't. I have a motorcycle I ride even though I probably shouldn't. I've got a sports car. I still like to do fun things.
Activities. Important. Absolutely.
Last night we went to Top Golf. And had a blast. We had some fun for a couple of hours. Yeah. So I think a lot of that is, how do men go from the traditional masculinity that you see to growing into this, your title is actually perfect, and I'm sorry that I fucked it up, but navigating masculinity is exactly right. Yeah. That you had a great title, because how do men masculate their way through these various stages of life? And I think that's a great.
And I think it's a great question to continue to keep examining. I don't pretend to have all the answers when it comes to that. Neither one of us do. But nevertheless, we have an opportunity and a venue to ask the question. Yeah. And then maybe some insights into our personal life experiences. But even if you think about it, describing a religion or describing yourself, it's a collection of stories. Yeah. You need to have a narrative. Yeah. In order to have a religion, and you need to have a narrative to have an identity. Right. So it's important for us to recognize that we're going to have to take a moment in our lives where we kind of just step back and reflect on what is that narrative. Yeah. Is it things that happened to me? Is it things that I did or things that I didn't do? Yeah. Fernando Pessoa, he said, Portuguese writer, he said, I bear the scars from all the battles I never fought. Yeah. And I said, yes, absolutely. Wow, that's true. Yeah. I bear those scars for the things that I pushed away or I avoided, exactly. That I neglected or negated because I was in a particular mindset or I was frightened or whatever that might be. Yeah. But midlife is an opportunity for us.
It is.
And that's what we want to keep going back to. Yeah. It's an awakening moment.
It is an awakening moment.
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Well, so this has been The Middle. Thank you for joining us. I'm Gary Illman.
And I'm John Baradino.
And we're going to see you next time. Don't know. Do we know what the next podcast is going to be?
I think we're going to talk about empathy, actually.
Yeah, we're going to talk about empathy, and we're going to talk about narcissism, and it ought to be a very interesting and lively discussion. We hope you join us. Again, if you enjoyed the podcast, please do hit the like button and subscribe, if you will. And we will see you next time here on The Middle.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye-bye.